Good morning from Vietnam. Thanks a lot, Minette, for joining our shows and sharing your story. And really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me on, huh?
Minette, would you please do us a great honor to share with our audience who you are and the works that you do, please?
So now I am an inclusive leadership consultant and speaker and soon to be author. I used to be in the tech field, but I left about 3 years ago to start my own business. And
Mm.
so I consult with companies who want to explore new models of leadership that are more inclusive to everybody.
Mm. And thanks a lot for sharing that. I read your profile and you say that after 3 decades being in the tech in the software industry, then you realize that the world needs a new model of leadership, right? And why is that? Can you share with us?
Yeah, it's probably a very long story that I'll try to make short, but yeah, I did spend 3 decades in the software industry. I started in 1989
Mm.
and I left in 2019. And so I started as a non-engineer in engineering field. I had a liberal arts background and I started as a technical writer and I wrote documentation and help systems for a long time.
Mm.
And then I ended up getting into management positions and I sort of slowly progressed through ranks of management and leadership until I was in a VP role at a very large company managing a really large global team.
Mm.
And in that long time and being a manager and being managed by other people, I realized that many people can't fully participate in
Mm.
their organizations. And that's because there are a lot of reasons. One is that they don't feel comfortable. They don't feel comfortable speaking up
Mm.
because there's sort of this general way of thinking. And if they think differently, they're going to be ostracized or embarrassed or ignored. And I was often that person. So I think part of it is that I was in engineering, but I wasn't an engineer. So just sort of the way I thought was different.
Mm.
And then I was a woman. And, over the years, really the numbers of women in tech have not changed that much. Sort of 30% women, even lower as you get into more senior positions. So I was often the only woman in the room.
Mm.
And I often felt like I don't know if I should say something. I want to speak up. When I was part of a leadership team, I felt that there were the dominant people in the group, and there were the people who felt a little marginalized. And I was often one of the people who felt marginalized. At the same time, I was in a position, like increasingly, of privilege and power. And so I felt like I could use my position to do good and to uplift others and to really help be the voice for people who didn't have a voice.
Mm.
But then I also felt like, I don't know if I'm always appreciated for who I am and what I bring. And I have, really in many ways all the privilege in the world. There's so many people who don't have the advantages that I have. And so I just realized that, I think the problem is people who get into management positions in general are not trained often to be
Mm.
managers, right? I
Yep.
mean, we often like, we're the best engineer, we're the best writer, and so we get promoted to be a manager.
Mm.
And yet, whoever taught us to really be a great manager or a great leader, and there's so little training, often you just get thrown in.
Mm.
And I think what I noticed, especially leading engineering teams, is yeah, really good engineers would get promoted to lead teams of people, but they didn't really know how to bring out the best in others and let everyone do their best work and contribute fully and have the same opportunities as others.
Mm.
And so eventually, after 30 years and 5 years in an executive role, I just decided, well, maybe I can take all of these learnings and all of these experiences, both that I've had and that I've seen other people have, and help more leaders at any level in any organization do better. And so that's why I decided to start my own business.
What a noble purpose. Thanks for doing that, Minette. Because that, like you said, a lot of us been thrown to the leadership position because of our capability of performing something, and we get into the role not knowing a lot of skills, not knowing a lot of like better ways to leading people. Especially in the ever changing environment like right now, right? So, but the whole notion of diversity and inclusion has been introduced by HR professional around the world. I think back in 2010 to 12 or something like that. But over the years, like you say, not a lot of the real diversity or inclusivity is not much change, especially in the tech world. But I also see in different kind of industry also it has some progress, but it's not significantly yet. And so having people like you to leading the change and make the progress faster is something that really appreciated for a lot of people, and so really appreciate that. I am one of them. I was in America. I was working in the in the management role also, and I know how it feels when you're in the room with a lot of different ethnicity, and you are really a minority in the room, and well, so thanks a lot for being so brave and passionate about making the change. I mean, I think it's a lot meaningful for many people. Okay.
Yeah, and as you said, there you felt like you were not included, maybe
Yeah.
being, and maybe it was that it was your ethnicity, maybe it was that you were a non-native English speaker in a room full of native English speakers. There's so many ways that we can feel that we're not included. And I think as you were talking about diversity, inclusion has been around for a while, and there's a lot of talk about it now, but we don't always think about all the ways that human beings are diverse. And some of them are very obvious and have been in the news, especially in the US. We talk a lot about race, we talk about gender, but we don't talk about some of the other aspects of diversity, and there are so many. So working in a global team, I was like working with all these different cultures and different ways of thinking and different ways of speaking. Neurodiversity is a very big topic that hasn't really been tackled until recently, that it's getting more in the news. Just cognitive diversity and different ways of thinking. And it was funny. I certainly, as I was in tech for longer and longer, I turned out to be one of the older people in the workforce as I aged. And, tech, for example, is just a very young industry. And I was starting to feel like I'm not really welcome anymore as being an older woman, right? And then when I think you may have seen that post I did about turning 62, and I suddenly was aware, because so many people reached out to me as like, what a huge problem ageism is, and how people who are older feel that they're not valued, people who are really young feel that they're not valued. And so just age alone is a differentiator where people can feel like I'm not fully able to participate here, or I'm not invited to the table, really. So, we just as human beings are diverse in infinite ways, and all of those ways can make us feel excluded or different.
Yes. And I think inclusion is having its most important power at the moment. More and more, attention from business leaders around the world. Right. 4 years ago, my wife and I talked to a very senior leaders in Vietnam, and so we asked about inclusive and the diversity and inclusion, and he has a role as the chief HR officer for the company. And he said that basically he didn't believe that they do all initiatives just to make sure that they have the program in place to show that the company is doing something, following the trend and responding to it. But he himself did not believe it up until 4 months ago that I met him again, and the whole conversation is totally different. So he went to the Europe for the global meeting. And then when he came back and he said that the whole notion of inclusivity and diversity, equity, everything has changed totally, and he's now a total believer of that. Otherwise, his organization is not going to be able to thrive just for the Vietnam market. And for that, I see that the whole shift changing in those will be creating a lot of momentum for inclusion and diversity to be take part and and flourish though. But we have a lot of different definition about diversity, inclusion, so it makes us feel confused a lot. So you are an expert in this field. I want to ask you, what is the next definition of inclusion? Can you share with us?
Sure. My definition of inclusion is that you, as someone in an organization, feel that you can fully participate, that you're respected and valued for who you are, and that you have all the same opportunities as anyone else in the organization.
Wow, it's a beautiful definition. Uh, Human being, we want to be loved, and we want to show that we love in people also. So, what happened to us over the past, years that we had that separations between one to another?
Well, there's so much to that. That's
Uh,
actually a really rich question because you're absolutely right. We as human beings need to feel that we belong. That
mhm,
need for belonging and community is part of who we are as a species, and it's how we have survived.
mm,
So it's an innate human need to be part of community and to be connected to other people.
mm,
I think, and I am not an expert in human biology or evolution, but what I have read and what I have learned is that one of the problems is that we by nature are drawn to people who are the most like us.
oh,
Like we have survived by being in communities of people that are the most like us.
mm,
And we see danger. We actually probably perceive danger in our ancient history in anyone who is different from
mm,
us. And so I think that does carry over into, I mean, when we think about it, like we look at who we are most comfortable with, who our groups of friends are, and they are often people who look like us or who have the same background, socioeconomic background, educational background, whatever that is.
mm,
And so part of the challenge for us and how we're disconnected is that we now work and we need to work, and we've seen the advantage of being in diverse environments, right?
mm,
That
mm,
innovation thrives and business results thrive when you have a more diverse group. But it's not naturally easy for us to interact with others who are different. And
mm,
so it does take effort, and it takes actually moving through that discomfort of, oh, this is someone who doesn't think like me, doesn't have the same background. We may not share a language, or we may have to struggle to communicate. And so we have to make an effort to work together, to be together, to find our commonality.
mm,
And I believe it is so worth it. I mean, this is a lot of the work that I try to do with others is that, yeah, it may be challenging to work in a very diverse team.
mm,
But if you can kind of, instead of retreating from the discomfort, like I may not know what to say, I may not, always say the right thing, but it's so worth it because you're going to connect with someone who you're going to learn from, you're going to experience new things because you don't have the same background and you don't think the same way, and your
mm,
world's going to be enriched. But it may be challenging along the way, and there may be bumpy spots on the road because, yeah, we, especially when we are working with really diverse teams, is that we may say something that's going to offend someone and we didn't mean to do that, but it
mm,
was only because we didn't understand or we didn't know.
mm,
And so we have to be able to go, oh, I apologize, I truly didn't understand, thank you for educating me, can we move through this? All of these kinds of things can be hard. And
mm,
what I have found is that a lot of people are afraid of making a mistake
ah,
when they're working, like, especially like in the US, we've been dealing so much with race in recent years. Like, oh, what if I say the wrong thing? So better for me not to say anything. But
ah,
that's perpetuating the problem. So I think it's a complicated question with a complicated answer.
mm,
That yes, we need to be together, we need to be with others,
mm,
we have that human need to connect,
mm,
and it's easier for us to connect with people who are just like us. So how can we connect
mm,
with the people who are not just like us? And that can take some effort and finesse, training and learning and being
mm,
open to learning.
mm. So you raised the question that I would like to ask also. If business leaders they want to create an inclusive environment and inclusive culture for their organization, how can they take the baby steps toward that and show and establish that? Can you share with us?
Yes, and this is a lot of the work I do in my consulting
Mm,
business. Is like first they have to really commit to it, because what I've seen a little bit of is some leaders say, like, let's just do one training, right? We'll
mm,
bring you in, we'll do one training on inclusive leadership, and then we're done. Good
mm,
job, check the box.
ah,
But I think the first thing is to really admit that it's going to be a journey, and it's not a check the box, it's not a one-time thing, but to commit to, we really want to have a more inclusive culture,
mm,
and I'm a leader who wants to do the work. And
mm,
so let's start somewhere, and let's keep doing work, and let's keep measuring and learning and adjusting as we go. And for leaders, I think it really starts with self-awareness of their own behavior,
mm,
and like, how am I showing up as a leader? Am I inadvertently shutting down people whose voices we need to hear?
Mm.
Am I listening with a truly open mind and curiosity?
Mm.
Am I being empathetic to others and what they're going through?
Mm.
And am I creating a culture here in my team where it is safe to speak up? And so those are all things that, there are very practical things you can do. And that's some of the work that I do with leaders. But it's really that first step of like, okay, I have to show up and be aware of my own behavior. And then I can really help my entire organization grow and develop and establish new norms of how we behave as a team. How do we interact? How do we run our meetings? Who do we invite to meetings? Like, all of these things are really important, and they often are done very unconsciously.
So it changed from the leaders first. They have to be committed to create an inclusive environment, because the great resignation happen everywhere now. It's just a response to a lot of things that not working properly in the system, in the management system also. So you think that with inclusivity, and if we can build a culture inclusive, it can help partly to solve the issue for leaders with the great resignation happen around?
I do think so. I think that a lot of the great resignation and the quiet quitting, like the terms are evolving, right?
Yeah.
I think so much of it comes from people saying, I do not want to be in a toxic culture. I do not want to work for a leader who doesn't understand me and who isn't interested in my own well-being. And I'm going to go somewhere where I'm appreciated, where I can have, whether it's work-life balance or whether it's, whatever it is that's important to you, where I can do meaningful work, where I can be appreciated for what I uniquely offer. And, people are not putting up with these situations that are, I use the word toxic because that comes up a lot when if you read any of the research and articles about it, which I'm sure you have. People are leaving the toxic boss, and they're leaving an environment that doesn't appreciate that we all have our own human struggles, and we have family life we have to deal with. And, people are just not tolerating this, sort of the old school of how work happened, how leadership was perceived.
Wow. I mean, Ed, I have a lot of executives who are my friends, and that's two things that they always feel regret. And first one is they thought they could run their own company earlier, but they did not. So they still in the corporate until they retire. The second is they wanted to write a book themselves, and then they did not. So you do both. So you run your own consulting firm, then you now about to publish your own book, right, in 2023. And I think that you also co-author for another book with another friend of yours also. Can you share with us, like why you decided to write a book, and what is the book about?
Yeah, so as you said, there are two books.
Yes.
So the book that's coming out first, I didn't intend to write. It's sort of a really interesting story.
Oh.
I was taking a class last year, last spring in 2021, and it was on how to run psychological safety assessments. It was based on the work of Amy Edmondson from Harvard and her work on psychological safety. So I was in this class, and we were learning how to run these assessments. And this other woman who was in the class was from Germany, and we just connected. And she wrote me an email, and the email said, the title of the email, subject line, "A Crazy Idea." And this was last June. And she said, Minette, I heard you talking about how there's not a lot of practical information on how leaders can increase psychological safety in their teams. Would you consider partnering with me and writing something? And she wrote, the word she used was, maybe we could write a little pamphlet. So we got on a Zoom call and we just started brainstorming, and we have an online whiteboard that is now huge that we've continued to collaborate on with ideas. And we ended up writing a whole book called The Psychological Safety Playbook.
Wow.
And then we thought, we're going to probably have to self-publish this. We hadn't really figured it out. And then my speaking agent introduced me to a publisher, and they were interested in it. So anyway, that book that I never planned on writing is coming out in February. And it was just such a wonderful collaboration with my co-author, Dr. Caroline Helbig in Germany. We've never met face to face. We did the whole thing over Zoom and Miro, like just using a couple of online tools, and we wrote a whole book together. So that's the first book. But in the meantime, I had for many years, like this was even still when I was in the tech industry,
Mm.
I really wanted to write a book about inclusive leadership. And I even outlined it. I probably outlined it in 2019. But while I was working full time in tech, it wasn't even time as much as it was headspace. I didn't have the sort of expansive space to really think about how I'm going to write this book. And so I left in 2019, and then I was really thinking about this book and really thinking about it, and put a couple proposals out and found a publisher, and I wrote it. And so that's a bigger book than the playbook, and it's coming out later in 2023. So yeah, I always wanted to write a book, and now I have two coming out in the next year.
So two books write parallelly, one with your friend in Germany, and then one you write it on your own. How can you manage the time to do all of that together? Can you share with us?
Time management, very interesting. So one thing I will say is that while I was working on the first book, the playbook with Caroline, it's a fairly short book in terms of word count. It's also illustrated, so it'll be a lovely book, but it's not super long. And we just really made it into manageable chunks because she's a consultant and I'm a consultant. So we had client work we were busy with. She has 4 children. I don't actually know how she does everything she does, but we just said, like, let's break it down into very small chunks. What if I write this and you write that, and we'll review it? And little by little, we got this thing written. And in a few months, we wrote, and it is a very short book. It's only 15,000 words, where most books are like 50 to 60,000 words minimum. So it's a short book, but we just divided it up into little chunks. And we made it manageable and not intimidating. And like, I put writing time in my calendar, so nothing else happens in my writing time. So that, I might move it around, but I have it in my calendar. But for the longer book, I have to admit, I had to really reduce my client work for about 6 months. I had some work that I took on with clients, but I had to just have huge blocks of writing time so that I could get it done. Because I found that I couldn't do an hour of writing. I needed like at least 2 to 3 hours minimum set aside for writing time, because it's not all that I'm sitting there writing. A lot of it is like thinking, reading something, doing a little online crawling around to find some ideas, and then writing. And it takes some time to get into that.
Wow. Minette, thanks for sharing. I will have 2 more questions for you. And the first question for you is, my wife and I is in the quest of helping people to improve their ability to think. All right, because we believe that the ability of thinking for people nowadays is not increasing, but actually it's decreasing. And so every time we got a chance to talk to experts, those who believe that have a very good ability to think really, really deep, we ask this question: how do you think? How do you process to thinking? Can you share your secret of thinking to us, Minette?
That's such an interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before, so I need to think about that.
Now think about thinking.
Let me think. Okay, one thing is that a lot of my thinking happens when I'm doing other things. So I find that I sometimes get really clear thinking when I'm out walking. I do a lot of walking and hiking. So sometimes I get a very clear head when I'm not trying to think, right? I'm just out moving and I'm in nature, whatever. That often helps. It's just to clear my head for clear thinking. But also, I love brainstorming with someone else. I find that I'm someone who processes really well by talking things through. And so that's why I think this book, co-authoring a book with someone, it was so great, because Caroline and I would do a lot of online brainstorming. Like, we'd get an idea and then we'd go like, how do we think about that? And she has this great method that, I now practice. Is she'd say, let's put on a timer for 5 minutes, and we just silently write down all of our ideas, and then we talk about them. And I find that's a really nice way, like, to not be overwhelmed. Like, I need to solve a big problem. Instead, it's just like 5 minutes of anything that comes to your mind, and then you can talk it through and iterate it and make it better. So that's one of the ways I like to think things through with someone else. When I was working alone, for example, on my business and my book, I do a lot of reading, other people's work, other people's research, articles. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I just love to absorb information and then process it. Like, okay, what was it that I like from this and this and this? And I think what I'm good at I don't do original research or anything. I read a lot. And
Mm.
so what I'm good at is synthesizing information from others and
Mm.
saying, I'm going to take this from here and that from here and this from here, and I can put that together into something really coherent and helpful. So that's a lot of like, it's like I do a lot of learning and then synthesizing and integrating and then figuring out how might I put this together in a way that'll be useful and actionable for others.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. So brainstorming and then a lot of reading so that you can absorb the information and then translate into something that meaningful for you, right? And then uh, do the thinking process where you're not even think of something, like hiking and
Yeah,
walking,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, sometimes the best solutions happen when I'm out for a walk or when
Mm.
I'm in the shower. Like, oh, I've got to remember that. That's a brilliant idea.
And sometimes because of your free of mind, the information that already in your head, it just popped up and then it just came up unexpectedly, and those are very important information that also, right?
Exactly.
And I know that the next couple of months will be will be so exciting for you because you have two books to be introduced all at once, right? And but we want to ask the question about things happen after that. All right. So is there anything exciting that you, Minette, is working on that you would like to share with us so we can celebrate with you in advance?
Honestly, right now I am so focused. So the interesting thing about books, which I
Mm.
didn't realize until I got into the middle of it, is that in some ways the writing isn't the hard part, at least
Mm.
not for someone who likes to write. The hard part is promoting the book and marketing the book and finding an audience for the book. So that's really my focus right now is, oh, there's so much work to do around that because I don't want to have co-written one and written another book and then have no one read it, right?
Yeah.
So trying to build an audience and build a platform as an author, that's what I'm definitely working on. And beyond those books, what I really hope is that because I will have books, once you have a book, you sort of have more of a platform to go do speaking events and consulting. I hope to really have offerings around both of those books. Like if you want to increase psychological safety in your organization, we will come in, my co-author and we have a whole set of workshops that you could do for a whole year if you wanted to. So like
Mm.
really offer programs. And the same thing on inclusive leadership. I want to I think for both books, like they're very interrelated, of course. They're not separate from one another in many
Mm.
ways. I'd like to build a movement of inclusive leadership and leaders who really create psychologically safe teams where we just start to see that this becomes the new model of leadership. And
Mm.
there are more inclusive leaders than uninclusive leaders, and more leaders who know how to create a safe environment than those who shut down the dissenting voices. So that's my dream, and I'm working towards it step by step and little by little. And I think the important thing is not to get overwhelmed right now because the whole marketing part can be very overwhelming to a new author, and I'm in the middle of it right now.
Wow. Thanks for sharing. Work is a very important part of life, right? And then if we can build better leaders, then they can build better work for the people that they lead. And so those under that situation and that environment can be coming home happy. And that dining table, then the conversation at home will be a lot more meaningful for everybody, and we build the future workforce that get into the workforce that happy also. So that whole loop of circle is so beautiful to me, and thanks to all people like you, Minette, and your friends and all of the advocates out there who constantly doing changing the world leading, so that we have a lot more equipped leaders who come into work with a better thought of what else they can do better for the people. Thank you for doing that. Okay.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you.
We really appreciate your time. You have a wonderful afternoon, and the happy September to you early.
Thank you to you too.
Okay, Vinay. Bye bye for now. Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.